Have you ever been part of a team where everyone was individually capable, but somehow the team still struggled to perform? Have you ever seen productivity hacks help one person, but accidentally slow everyone else down? And have you ever wondered what the best teams actually do differently? Today I'm joined by Dr. Ron Friedman. Ron is an award-winning psychologist, best-selling author, and keynote speaker. He's the author of The Best Place to Work, Decoding Greatness, and Super Teams, where he explores what separates truly high-performing teams from the rest. In this conversation, Ron helps us challenge some of the biggest misconceptions about team performance. As you listen today, I invite you to think about your own team. Are you aligned around the same goal? Are the roles clear? Do people feel they genuinely need each other to succeed? And are your current habits helping the team perform or just helping individuals survive? Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Dr. Ron Friedman. Dr. Ron is an award-winning psychologist, a best-selling author, and a keynote speaker. He translates the psychology of human behavior into practical and actionable strategies for leaders and for high-performance teams. He's been featured in Harvard Business Review and in the New York Times, and he's the author of multiple books, including The Best Place to Work, Decoding Greatness, and Super Teams. And he's famous for having this saying that team performance is often misunderstood. So that's what we're going to explore today. What does high performance really mean in a team setting? And what are some of the misconceptions that we have about high performance teams? And how can we course correct if we find ourselves into those traps of some of those misunderstandings? So without any further ado, Ron, I'd love it if you'd say hello to the audience. Give us a little flavor of your very rich background. But most importantly, I'm keen to know what inspires you to do what you do today.
Well, much of it came from my experience of being in the corporate world. So I started off as a psychology professor, teaching at colleges and universities, and then I went off into the corporate world. So I got into education because I love learning new things. And one of the tragedies of being a professor is you're basically teaching the same thing over and over again. So it's kind of like being in your favorite class and then never being allowed to leave that class ever again. And so I decided to become a pollster. So my job was to measure public opinion, figure out what it is that that individuals believe, and then advise organizations on how they can shape those opinions using psychological principles. And what I discovered in my experience in the corporate world is that there was a massive divide between the latest science and the modern workplace. All the factors that I had spent years studying and researching in terms of what is it that gets people motivated and engaged and creative, all of those factors were being ignored. So that led me to write my first book. It was The Best Place to Work. And in it, I took over 1,000 academic studies and translated them into plain English, so that regardless if you're just someone starting out or you're a CEO, you have access to the best research on creating a great workplace. But there was something valuable that was missing from that book, and that is, what do the best teams do differently? Because even within great organizations, you have a lot of variation in terms of the quality of the teams. Some teams are high performing, some are not. So in this book, Super Teams, I focused in on what is it that the best teams do differently.
You're really interesting, Ron. There's three things that jump out to me that I want to test, probably one at a time. This difference between the academic world and the real world. Kind of curious to know what you learn about human behavior being a pollster. And then, what is emerging around these teams? So, but let's go with the first one first. This is curious. I had a very similar conversation about psychosocial safety with a construction team recently, right? And you can imagine a bunch of, I'm going to say laborers, skilled laborers, like I'm talking highly skilled laborers, and this science of psychosocial safety is taking hold in Australia where there is some academic research coming through about what it means. But here's these people in the workplace that are turning up at a work site at 7:30 in the morning, and they're having their safety talks around, and all of a sudden they're getting asked to talk about mental health, role clarity, all of these types of things. And it's coming from the academic world. And I got to tell you, I get puzzled looks from some of them going, I'm going to swear for a second, what is this shit? right? So, how do we translate? Because the academic science is important. It's drawing out emerging things for us, emergent properties and new ways of looking at the world. It can be, I'm going to say, not arm's length removed from the workplace. It can be 17 arm's lengths removed from the workplace. How do we do that translation, Ron?
Well, first, let me just say there are a lot of findings in research, and I'm not here to suggest that all findings in research need to be applied to the workplace, but there are some that are just no brainers. So, for example, we have research showing that 80% of people lie during interviews. I mean, we continue to conduct interviews and we continue to bring people in. And what do we actually decide on when we have an interview? More often than not, it's whether or not we like the person. And who do we like? We like people who remind us of ourselves. And so we end up hiring for the wrong reasons. That's just one example. Another example is how managers motivate. In many cases, they motivate through rewards and punishments. And we know that that doesn't really sustain motivation. We know from research that people need a quiet space to do focus work. This is actually one of the findings that we confirmed in the research in super teams is most workplaces are an attentional war zone. It's impossible to get your actual work done. And when that happens, people end up compensating in all these ways that make work longer and really harder to recover your energy and lead to burnout. So those are just some examples of the gaps between science and the workplace. And so, again, there are some very specific, concrete things that any leader can apply to be more effective. And the wonderful thing about looking at this research is that it takes the guesswork of how to do it effectively, because when we have research-based findings, what that means is we've identified specific variables that lead to specific outcomes. And so the guesswork gets taken out. So you asked another question, which is, why isn't more of it being applied? And the answer to that is because if you're a leader in a business setting, you probably don't have spare time to read academic journal articles. And even if you did, you would have a hard time knowing how to apply them because academics write for other academics. They don't write for the business world. So I saw that as an opportunity to apply my very specific skill, which I developed during polling, which is you write research reports for executives. And when you do that, the last 2 pages are the actionable recommendations. And what I noticed doing that work is all the executives would they love the fact that the research was done, but what they really care about is the actionable settings at the end. So they'd always turn it to the final 2 pages. So I thought, what if I did that for all these academic studies? And that's exactly what the best place to work was about, was making over 1,000 academic studies actionable for leaders.
Yeah, that's really good, Ron. Because I would say a lot of people wouldn't know where to start even to be able to translate sometimes what it means. Like, so if they're reading some deep research on identity, on the psychology of identity, they'd be more informed and they'd be knowledgeable and go, oh yeah, that's really interesting. They might even scratch their head at one point and go, oh, I've never thought about that. But what does it mean for the way I do my next one-on-one? Or what does it mean for the way I do my next team meeting? Or what does it mean for the next time I give someone feedback, as an example? Because feedback is a practical thing that they have to do in the workplace. How do they translate this academic research about identity into, well, what's that going to mean in terms of how I deliver feedback? That's the missing thing that you're filling here, Ron.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I will just add to that, Mick, that's kind of one of my crucial filters, which is if I wouldn't do it myself, I'm not going to put in my book or write about it because I wouldn't recommend anybody else do it. If I don't do it myself, I'm not going to recommend you do it. And secondly, if it's not actionable, I don't write about it because it's like if you want to be educated in theory, good for you. That's not my role. My role is to help you apply the best of what science has uncovered so that you could be a more effective leader.
Yeah, really good. Okay. Now, how do we then make that a closed loop? I'm making an assumption that you do this because looking at you, I can imagine that this is what's happening. Then the other part is real life is then the petri dish. This is when the experiment can happen. Like, so if you come up with a new theory, a new framework, a new actionable insight, well, then in the real world, we need to pressure test it. And we go, okay, well, what's working? What's not working? Do we need to subtly pivot this framework a little bit, make little adjustments? So how do you make it a closed loop learning?
Well, part of the research that we did in super teams is we looked at what real world teams are doing and what the most effective teams are doing differently. And so, how we did that research was we interviewed over 6,000 knowledge workers and we asked them two simple questions about their teams. The first question is, how effective is your team at achieving its goals? And the second question is, compared to other teams in your industry, how would you rate your team's performance? And then we took the teams with a perfect score. It was a very small group, about 8% of teams. We call them super teams, and we looked to see what are the super teams doing differently. And we looked at everything from how they structure their day to how they run their meetings to even how they recover after work hours and on weekends and on vacations. And that is why I think this research is so vital and so important, is because we're not talking about theories. We're talking about real world teams, people who have worked together for years on end and what they do differently.
All right. So this is where we need to go in this conversation. This is where we all need to lean in and pay attention. Such a large study of organizations of, comparing really high performance teams versus, let's call it, the rest of us. I'm going to put myself in the rest of us category for now, because I strive for high performance, but I know that I don't always achieve it. What I'm curious about, the first part, is when in the two questions that you're asked, what did you learn about kind of self-awareness gaps? Like, so were there people out there that think they're performing here and they're really here, or even vice versa? They think, oh, this place is not really that great, but it's actually better than average. Like, how strong was the self-awareness when you're asking those questions?
It's a great question. We didn't look at self-awareness, actually. That's a good topic for future studies. Here, what we looked at, actually, let me just take a step back and say, part of what I'm going to rephrase this, Mick. So let me start that part over. One of the things we know about people's evaluation of their own teams is that it is the single best predictor of a team's actual performance. And when you think about the alternatives to a team evaluating its own performance, there are not too many alternatives that are more promising than that. In other words, if a manager evaluates the team, a manager's evaluation is likely to be very different than people's actual experience working on the team. And people's actual experience is going to be a much better predictor of whether they want to stay at the company, whether they are looking for an alternative position, whether they're engaged with their work, whether they'd recommend their employer to someone else. And so that's why we were very curious about how people view their own teams, because that tends to be the best predictor of a team's actual performance.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was there often quite a distance, I'm going to say, or did you come across many examples where the leader is going, oh, my team, 90%, we're awesome, and then finding out the team were like, yeah, 30, 40, like, how big was the gap?
That's interesting. That's also not something in this study, because this study was done in a particular way, which is polling people about their teams. And then we looked at the behaviors. But what you're asking is there typically a gap between leaders and individuals? And, I think that there are certain personality types that lend themselves to having potentially a gap. But I would imagine that there's going to be a fairly high correlation between leaders' perception and people's actual experience.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. I feel like my curiosity is just going to get away on me a lot today. I now got another thought. How much of it do you think then becomes, I'm going to say almost self-fulfilling prophecies fueled by confirmation bias? Let me explain the question a little bit. Like, so if I go to work and I think that my boss hates me, I'm going to see all of the signs that confirm that my boss hates me, and I'm likely to ignore the contrary evidence that actually she really likes me. She thinks I'm doing a great job. So in that theory in those polls where you're asking people, hey, what's it like around here? Is this a good place to work and all these kind of things? If they're in a frame that might have come from initially a real evidence, but if they get into that mindset of this place is a crock of shit, so I'm going to swear again, this workplace is crap, they're going to see all the things that confirm it's crap. And conversely, if they think, oh, my team is awesome, we are so cool, they're going to see the signs all the time. They're going to go, oh, see how good we are? How much does confirmation bias come in here where it just gets away on you either in a good way or a bad way?
Well, confirmation bias certainly is something that predicts how people perceive their reality. And in fact, one of the findings that I think is so interesting that we uncovered in doing the research for the book is something called the liking gap. And most of us struggle with this. Most of us misperceived how well liked we are by our colleagues. And typically, it's we underestimate how well we are liked. And what happens when you underestimate how well you are liked is you start acting in a way that is consistent with how a person who is disliked would behave. So we smile a little bit less, we are less extroverted. And this is something you can use to your advantage, because if you just simply assume that people like you more, they will actually like you more. And so you might think to yourself, well, isn't that just fooling myself? And the answer is no, it's actually a much needed correction for a bias that we all struggle with. And so I think it's a really interesting idea, because you can apply it not just to dealing with your colleagues, but also to dealing with your boss and to dealing with potential clients.
Oh, that's really interesting. It makes me think of the spotlight effect in some degree, like a little bit of a projection of our own insecurities, where we think that people are thinking of us in certain ways, or they're worrying about, they noticed how scuffy my shoes were today, or they're noticing that I'm carrying a little weight around my midriff, and they're not at all. They're not at all noticing those things. So we're walking around. This is a theory of mine that I haven't fully tested, by the way, Ron, but with a psychologist like you, I feel in safe ground to test it a little bit here, that with this spotlight effect, we walk around in the fear of judgment. And the fear of judgment is about our own insecurities. But the funny thing is we're walking around, I'm sitting here going, oh, what does Ron think of me? And the two most likely scenarios, in my view, is that either Ron is going about his own day going, he's worried about, he's got to remember to pick up the milk on the way from home, or he's worried about preparing for his presentation tomorrow or whatever. So he's not even thinking about me at all. Or the second most likely is Ron is sitting there going, oh, I wonder if Mick is judging me. So we're all walking around wondering whether we're judging each other. And if that's the case, we would think, yeah, people don't like me as much as they really do. How does that extrapolation sit with you?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell you something that I think about often, which is in preparation for public speaking, which obviously can be stressful for just about anyone. And one of the things that I've learned about a strategy that is effective for reducing stress, but also making you a better speaker, is recognizing that how people usually remember events is based on peak and end. Meaning peak, which is the best part of the talk. That's people are going to remember the best part of the talk. And they'll remember how it ended, which means if you screw up along the way, they're probably going to forget it. So even if you have screwed up, just focus on delivering a peak and remember that you need to end strongly. And if you do those two things, most people will remember it as a positive experience. And I think that applies to far more than public speaking. I think that is true for just about every client interaction you have, every colleague interaction you have. And it reminds me of something that Yo-Yo Ma said with regard to his performing on the cello. And what he would say is, once he's made that first mistake, it's a relief. He doesn't, because now he knows, okay, I no longer have to worry about being perfect. And I just think that's a great way of looking at it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think I'm going to extrapolate a little bit further here and go, the prevalence that you might have made a little mistake. You might have said something in a meeting that didn't come out exactly the way you intended. And then you go away and beat yourself up about that for 3 days. Everyone forgot about it 30 seconds later, but you're the one still thinking about it. So, okay. So there's two things I want to replay to the audience now as takeaways, and then go on to more about teams here. That chances are you're more liked than you think you are. So stop beating yourself up about this. And second, I love this bit about the peak and the end. So whether it's a team meeting, a one-on-one, a presentation, any interaction, focus on giving a peak and making sure that the end is memorable. That's really good, Ron. Okay, so two big ones, and I don't know which one to go with first, but I'm going to go with the negative first. So when you've studied all of these super teams, what would you say on the other side, on the low performance teams, what was the most common denominators you found? And I'm going to call it toxic teams, even just to put a label on it. What was the most common denominator that you found in the ones at the other end of the scale?
Well, first, let me just say, most people are not really on teams. They may work in the same department, but that doesn't mean they have a team mindset. In order for people to develop that team mindset, they need three things. They need, first, a shared goal. They need a single outcome that everyone is pushing for together. A lot of times people have different agendas. So for example, Mick, if I want to get home at 5 o'clock to take my kids to soccer and you're focused on getting a promotion, then we're going to have some conflicts because we don't have the same goal. So you need to make sure people are all pulling in the same direction. And also I'll add to this and say, compensation sometimes plays into this because if everyone's simply rewarded for their own performance, it's really hard to feel like you have a shared goal. So you need some metrics that everyone is fighting for together. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need role clarity. I need to know what I'm responsible for, and I need to know what you're responsible for, and I need to know how those two things fit together. If we don't have role clarity, then either we're going to drop some balls or we're going to have some turf wars. Either one of those is problematic. The third thing is you need interdependence. Interdependence is just a fancy psychological word, which means we need to feel like we need each other in order to succeed. So if I feel like if I just do my job, I don't care what you're up to, we're not going to have that team mindset. I need to feel like I need you in order for both of us to feel like we have that team mentality. So most teams are lacking in at least one of these. They don't have the shared goal, the role clarity, or they don't have the interdependence. And when you have a team that's missing one of those, what you have is a recipe for dysfunction. And I think most people listening to this can think about a team that they've been on that was pretty bad, and they can quickly identify which one of those was missing or which two of those or which three of those were missing, right? Because it's so common. So that's the first thing is you need to have those three elements to develop a team mentality. And it's up to the leader to make sure people have that. But this book isn't just about creating a team. This is about creating a super team. And so that I'll just leave it there and say, that's where I think most people are coming from a position of not even having a team mentality.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. They probably would say that they're on a team if you ask them, but the ingredients aren't there. The things that were jumping into my mind, Ron, if I can test them with you when you were talking through that. The first one, yep, made complete sense. Do we have a shared goal? And is our reward around that shared goal, or is it around individual goals? And that's going to govern how we show up and what we focus on. When you're speaking about role clarity and interdependence, the things that jumped into my mind, and this comes from Drexler-Sibbitt's team performance model, what I'm sharing here, but the questions that came into my mind was, do I understand why I am here? And do I understand who you are and why you're here? And if I understand why I'm here, what gifts or superpowers I'm bringing to the table, and I understand who you are and why you're here, what is your gift and what are you bringing to the table, then we can bring those two gifts together and go, oh, okay. Now, Ron and Mick, we can actually create something. We can co-create something, bring something new into existence that wouldn't have existed without the two of us. So we need each other. But I understand who I am. I understand who you are. Now I understand why we need each other. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, you need to feel like you're a valued member of the team. You need to feel like you're contributing something valuable and unique. Now, again, that's up to the leader, but it's also, and this is now stepping into super team credit territory, is it's up to your colleagues and teammates as well. Because on the best teams, the credit doesn't just come from the top down, it gets shared from peer to peer. People on super teams are much higher in sharing credit with one another. A lot of people think that if they share credit, they're going to make themselves less impressive. And so they hold on to it because they feel like they're worried that people won't respect them. But the truth is, and this is what the research shows us, is people will respect you more if you share credit with your colleagues. And it's because the only person who would share credit is someone who's confident and has humility. And those are the exact traits people look for in a leader. So this is what I tell people all the time is the next time somebody praises your work, don't just soak it in yourself. Redirect the spotlight to someone who contributed to your success. People will respect you more and your team's performance will improve.
I need to triple down on that one and confirm it, Ron. And it's not just your team members will respect you and appreciate it. It goes all the way to the CEO and the board. When senior executives see someone be able to do that, share the credit and say, yep, this is what this person contributed and this is how we succeeded, the opinion of that person increases dramatically. And if they stand up and say, I did this, I did that, it actually has the counter. Like you think that, you're self-promoting your achievements. No, it actually has the opposite effect. People think less of this. Yeah.
It's actually there's research showing it's a great way of touting your own praise if you can do it in a way that discusses the team's role in doing it. So this is something that people find sometimes challenging. And I'll admit I'm one of these people. I don't like to toot my own horn and talk about all the things I've achieved. But if you can do it through the lens of here's what our team achieved, people don't view it as arrogance. They view it as competence, and they see it as a sign of leadership.
Yeah. And they're going to extrapolate themselves. You don't have to do it for them. I see this all the time. The CEO who's just had that presentation where the person's done that, they'll often turn around and go, yeah, thank you, Ron. And by the way, thank you for your leadership. This wouldn't have been possible without you. You didn't have to say it. They all connect the dots.
That's right.
Yeah, really good. Okay. So there's a big takeaway for leaders listening to the show. Listen to those 3 ingredients that Ron is talking about there. Do you have shared goals? Are your rewards connected to those shared goals? Do you have role clarity? And do you have clarity around interdependence on how people need each other to be successful? If you can tackle those 3 things, you're heading in the right direction. All right. I mentioned this a little bit when we did the intro, that you often say that team performance is misunderstood. So in all of this research, what was your biggest surprise around our misunderstandings of team performance?
Oof. I don't know how much time you have, Mick, but let me take a step back and share with you what the 3 things are that super teams do differently. So we took all the findings and we put them in 3 buckets. Super teams share 3 key strengths. The first is they get more done by better managing their time, energy, and attention. The second is they don't just collaborate well, they actively make one another better. They lift each other up, they bring out the best in each other. And the third is even when things are going well, they're not satisfied. They're constantly looking to build their skills and improve over time. So those are the 3 key strengths. So you need to have all 3. You can't just have 1 or 2. If you want to be a super team, you need to be a team that gets more done by better managing time, energy, and attention. The second is making each other better. And the third is improving over time. The good news is every one of those strengths is learnable, which means by building the right habits, any team can dramatically improve its performance. Now, you asked, what are some of the surprises? There were literally a ton. There's a surprising finding to me, almost every other page in super teams. And I'll give you just a handful. The first surprise is productivity tips. A lot of times we encounter these productivity tips online about how do you get more done during the day. Well, one of the secrets is turn off your notification. Another is batch your emails. Only look at your email 3 times a day. And as it turns out, those productivity tips, while they may help the individual, they don't help the team. And it's because if I unilaterally decide that I'm not going to be available to the team unless it's 8 o'clock or 12 o'clock or 4 o'clock when I'm checking my email, that slows the rest of the team down. And so as I say in the book, one person's deep work becomes another person's bottleneck. And so you can't just unilaterally decide these. And so super teams are solving these issues on a team-wide level. They're setting aside dedicated focus blocks. They're doing things like on Tuesday between 3:30 and 5, no one has to monitor their email. Everyone can just put their head down and get work done. They're also scheduling meeting-free days so that people can attend to work without the constant disruptions of meetings. And so what we find when you look at how they're managing to get more done, it's by minimizing distractions and maximizing focus as a team.
Yeah, really good, Ron. You probably looked at puzzled looks on my face when I was listening to you, because I was sitting there going, yeah, but we need some of these individual productivity measures. But what I'm seeing here is it's now a collective decision, right? So yeah, we might have deep work Thursdays, but we're all doing it. We're all doing it at the same time. Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. And if we don't have that conversation, you end up with those bottlenecks.
Yeah, to be clear, though, I'm not suggesting that people don't need, as you said, I'm not suggesting people don't need deep work time. In fact, they very much need it. So one of the findings that we came across while looking at average teams is the average worker loses 18 hours a week to meetings. They then lose another 11 hours a week digging themselves out of messages, meaning email, Slack, text messages from their colleagues. That leaves about a day to do a week's worth of work. And what happens when you have to cram a week's worth of work into a single day? You look for ways to create more time. You come in early, you work late, you work weekends, or you multitask. And all of those are problematic and lead to burnout. And so you've got to address this at the team-wide level, because this is, for years we've been asking, why are people getting burnt out at work? A better question is, how do they manage to get any work done in the first place when they lose 29 hours a week before they've accomplished a single task?
So a listener listening to this, how do they start with this then? So if they're listening to this going, yeah, we do none of that, we don't do any of what Ron's talking about here, how do they start those conversations about aligning individual productivity and team productivity so it's actually cohesive together?
There's a lot of things that you can do. And it's tough for me to pick a single tip because there are so many in the book, but I'll give you one just to start. I think experimenting with a 30-minute focus block where no one has to look at their emails and no one can have a meeting on a Tuesday or a Thursday, just try it. Try it as an experiment and then see if the team feels like it was helpful. I'm willing to bet it is, because what's happening right now is there's so much coordination tax that we're all incurring because everyone is it's kind of, I describe it in the book as a focus free for all. Everyone's trying to carve out their own time. And then we end up incurring all these delays that slow everyone down as a team. So that's one idea. Another idea that I talk about in the book is something called meeting guidelines. And meeting guidelines are simple rules that you decide with your team about what constitutes a meeting and what doesn't. So, in most companies, there aren't any guidelines around what deserves a meeting and what doesn't. Just about anybody can call a meeting for any reason. And the unfortunate truth is a lot of people use meetings as a crutch. They call a meeting because it makes them look good, because it looks to other people like they're getting stuff done, but then it gives them license to procrastinate because after all, they're waiting for the meeting. Meeting guidelines prevent that from happening. So for example, in my team, we have a simple rule: no decision, no meeting. Unless there's a decision to be made, we're not going to have a meeting. If you have an update, great, send an email. You have a question, pick up the phone. Unless there's something we all need to collectively decide together, we're not going to pull people away from their work. Another example of a meeting guideline is from a company called Percolate in New York City. They have a meeting guideline that says no spectators. If you're not contributing to the meeting, you don't need to be there. It's not a criticism, it's respect for your time. A lot of people understand very clearly that if you invite people who don't need to be in the meeting to the meeting, that's a waste of their time. What they don't quite appreciate is just having those extra people in the room makes the meeting worse for the people who actually need to be there. And it's because the more people you have in the room, the more everyone feels like they need to contribute, the longer the meeting, and the worse the decision. There's research out of Bain showing that past 7 people, the quality of a group's decision drops by 10%, and it gets worse the more people you add. And so meeting guidelines, great way to start in terms of saving people time, given that half their week is now going to meetings.
There's an interesting dichotomy that shows up in a lot of workplaces here, Ron, around what you said about the meeting attendees, right? I think most people would agree a meeting with the right people in the room is going to be a more efficient meeting. But we do have people that get offended, Ron. They get offended and go, well, why wasn't I invited to that meeting? It can be the very same people at the end of the week that then complain that they got invited to 21 meetings. So we do have a dichotomy there, but I think the answer is having an adult conversation about it with everyone and setting ground rules, like you're saying, and to have a mentality that more meetings doesn't mean better alignment. It's better meetings makes better alignment. How does that sit with you?
I appreciate you bringing this up, because this is one of the strategies I bring up in super teams is how do you diplomatically disinvite someone from a meeting they don't need to attend? And so I provide a sample email that you can use as a template the next time you want to try this yourself. And basically what the email does is it tells the other person, I'm going to have this meeting with the following people, and here's what we're interested in accomplishing. And I'd love your input on because I know you've had a lot of good experience with this. Could you share your input on this? And I'm happy to loop back on what we discussed so we can save you some time. And if you'd like to attend the meeting, of course you can join. And so what that does is it allows them the opportunity to weigh in. They know they're going to be in the loop, and it gives them the autonomy to decide if they need to be there. And so, I think a lot of times people feel like they need to be in the room But what they really want is they want input and they want access to information. And if you provide them with input and access to information, they no longer feel like they have to be in the meeting.
Yeah, good. Okay. So I'm feeling now that if that's done well, that they're not going to feel excluded, but they're also going to feel respected, that their time was respected. I didn't get invited to a 90-minute meeting when I got other things to do, right? So it's, if you get that pitch right, I think you can get there. All right. So some of these rituals and habits we're talking about here, I can really see how these can align with the first part that you said, which is we're going to manage our time, our energy, and our attention better. What about the second one, making each other better? What does that look like, Ron?
So making each other better happens in a few different ways. One is when people are surrounded by others who do good work, it raises the bar for everyone. And so that's exactly what we see in our research, where on super teams, 94% of people say, my teammates motivated me to do my best work. The other way that they make each other better is by raising accountability. In our research, we ask people a simple question. When things go wrong on your team, who do you feel worse about letting down? Do you feel worse about letting down your boss? Or do you feel worse about letting down your teammates? And on super teams, it's not even close. 82% say, I feel worse about letting down my teammates. And there's this quote I love from a football coach here in the United States who says something along the lines, his name is PJ Fleck, is a college football coach. And he says something along the lines of, on bad teams, no one leads. On good teams, the coaches lead. But on elite teams, it's the players who lead. And I think it's exactly right. When people feel accountable to their teammates, they try harder, they take ownership, and they look for ways to make each other better. And the final thing I'd say about making each other better is that when you're surrounded by teammates who are really good at what they do and care about you, it gives you a ton of confidence to take on big projects. When you're facing a tough deadline, it no longer feels quite as stressful because your teammates have your back. And so those are just some examples of the ways in which being around high-performing teammates makes each of us feel more capable and more effective at our jobs.
Oh, there's a lot there to unpack. The accountability is interesting. I'm going to play to you a behavior that I see often, and I'm going to stick up my hand and be honest and say, I think I do this. So I'm going to test it with you, Ron, and say that around that accountability topic, that I see people prioritize emails from their boss above the team, right? So when they look at their email and they might have a 1 hour block where they're reading their emails, the first thing they're checking is that whether they got some email from their boss. They're not checking whether, oh, hang on, one of my teammates is relying on me. They're waiting on this input that I promised them. Why aren't I prioritizing that just as much?
Well, because they're smart. I mean, obviously, clearly, you're going to be more responsive to your boss, and I don't fault anybody for that. But here's what I'll say to that is when it comes to trust, response time is crucial. So one of the things we look at in super teams is what are the factors that contribute to trust in the workplace? And trust in the workplace is different than what you expect from a spouse or from a neighbor. There are specific criteria that we look for when determining whether or not to trust our teammates. And it comes down to three things. One is competence. Do you trust the person to do a good job? If you don't trust them to do a good job, you're not going to trust them. Second thing is caring. Do you feel like the person has your best interests in mind? Don't feel like they have your best interest. Doesn't matter how competent they are, you're not going to trust them. And the third thing, and this is the part that most of us fail at, is consistency. If you're inconsistent, it doesn't matter how good you are at your job and how much you care about the other person. If they can't count on you, they're not going to trust you. And response time plays into that. Because if you're responsive some of the time and then you go off and disappear for 3 days, I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, that slows everything down. I have to double check your work. I can't just hand things off. I'm constantly thinking about it. There's tremendous drag that is introduced when people don't trust each other. And so what we find on super teams is actually their response time is much lower, meaning it's much better than on average teams because you have that inconsistency on average teams. And again, it impacts trust. And when trust breaks down, everything slows down.
Yeah, really interesting. I'm going to play something to you and go, what I'm taking away from it is to think about that in two directions. And I'm thinking about, well, what am I looking for in team members. And I like your 3 Cs there. I'm looking for competence. I'm looking for caring, to know that they've got my back. And I'm looking for consistency. And then I'm going to look in the mirror, and then I'm going to ask myself, am I serving that out? So if I expect that from others, starts with me. I need to role model it. I need to show them that I'm competent and I know what I'm doing, that I care about them and I've got their back, and that I'm consistent and responsive when they need me. And then I'm going to get it back to me. How does that sit?
Well, yeah, I think as leaders, we do need to model the right behaviors. And what I'll say is, when I say competence, I don't mean perfection. Competence is not perfection. It's simply generally doing a good job. And when you don't know something, admit it. Because when you admit that you don't know the answer, it makes it safe for other people to be honest. And it sends a signal that on this team, no one is expected to have all the right answers. And so we're not talking about perfection. And in terms of consistency, I will say that a lot of the trust traps that we fall into don't happen because we're bad people. They happen because we get crunched for time. And so one of the things that's really crucial is to look at some of the places where maybe you've let others down on the 3 Cs that we just talked about, and look for ways to anticipate future trust traps so that you don't fall into them quite as easily. So an example of this might be, if you know that you're going to be in meetings on Tuesday, instead of waiting for those meetings to happen and then falling behind on your email, consider having an auto response that says, hey, I'm in meetings all day. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Or when you get an email and you don't have time to answer it, say, got it. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. That makes a tremendous difference, because a lot of times when people don't hear back from you, especially if you're a leader, they don't always assume you're busy. Typically, people fill knowledge gaps with a story, and that story tends to be negative. So they'll assume that you're not writing back to them because you didn't like what they said or because you don't respect them. And so anticipating these trust traps, having a plan in place can be really helpful.
Oh, that's very powerful, Ron. A saying I use often is, in a vacuum of information, people draw their own conclusions. And because of we're human beings, so our loss aversion is much greater than our appreciation of a gain. We tend to catastrophize. We tend to go to the negative explanation, not the positive one.
Yeah, if you're not secure in your relationship with your boss or with your colleagues, it's really common to disentangle people's opinions with people's perceptions of you. So it becomes, if you don't like my idea, you don't like me. And that's painful for people. And so that's why it's really important, not just to be consistent, but for people to know that you have their back, because they're less likely to make those harmful interpretations.
Yeah, really good, Ron. Okay, very powerful. Let's go to the third leg of the stool, for want of a better term. You spoke about never being satisfied, striving for better. What do the rituals look like for this in a team environment?
So I'll give you just a handful. First thing is, on super teams, they're just getting a ton more feedback. And on average teams, the feedback is happening top down primarily. It's the manager who gives feedback to the employees. On super teams, they're getting more feedback from their manager, but they're also getting way more feedback from their colleagues. And it's not because people are going to one another and giving out pointers on how to do the job better. It's because they're hiring something called feedback seeking. They proactively go to their colleagues and they say, hey, what do you think of this? They're getting their input early, they're making revisions, and then they're applying the insights before delivering the product to the manager or to the client. So they're constantly improving through more frequent feedback. The other thing is, they run more experiments. They're constantly experimenting, 48% more likely to experiment. So those experiments can be small. It can be A/B testing a landing page, or it can be much bigger, like trying to sell a service offering that doesn't yet exist. The key is to always be working on something that you're not 100% sure is going to work out, because the lessons you'll draw from that quote unquote failure will help you improve in the future. And the final thing I'll say on constant improvement is that they incentivize innovation. And one of my favorite examples of this is a company called 3M. I'm sure you've heard of them. It's the company that produces Scotch tape and Post-its. They've been around for over 120 years. And one of the secrets to their success is something called the 30% rule. And the 30% rule says, in order for a division to earn its bonus, at least 30% of its revenue must come from a product introduced in the last 4 years. And I love this idea because even when things are going well, no one's coasting. Everyone's constantly thinking about what's next. And so that's the sort of mindset you need if you're going to continuously improve. Is you want more higher quality feedback between teammates, you want more experimentation, and you want people to pursue innovation because they see it as the path forward.
Okay, so a feedback culture, which I think is going to be challenging for a lot because we know that this is one of the things that a lot of people struggle with, but it holds you back. If you're holding back that feedback and you're not giving it to each other, it's really going to hold the whole team back, not just the individual. It holds the whole team back. Experimentation and then innovation. Always willing to try something new. It might be little tweaks, right? It could be, oh, why don't we try it this way this time? And well, let's see how it goes and see if that's any better. And yeah, really, really interesting one. Can we quickly, because we've covered this on the show with other guests, how do we get past this fear of feedback? It's still prevalent in many workplaces. You're saying super teams give feedback quite readily. If someone's listening to this and go, but I'm not in a feedback culture, people are avoiding feedback. How do we get past it, Ron?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking this. We actually have a chapter in Super Teams on feedback. So how do you give good feedback? So first, let me give you some jarring statistics. 97% of feedback fails to improve performance. 97. Only 3% improves performance. And a third of feedback actually worsens performance. And it's because it's delivered in a way that demoralizes people. So how do you do it better? The number one tip I can offer you, and this is very counterintuitive if you've been received training on how to deliver feedback, is don't focus on the past, focus on the future. And here's what I mean by that is if someone handed in a memo late and you had to work on the weekend because of that, don't talk about how they delivered it late and what an impact it had on your weekend and how it ruined your weekend, how you had to struggle. And did they know that had that impact on you? Because all that's going to do is it's going to make them defensive and they're not going to hear the rest of it. What you should do instead is say, hey, the next time we have a memo that's due on Friday, how do you feel about sending it to me on Thursday? Because that'll give me a day to think about it and really make some better changes before I submit it to the client. They're much more likely to be receptive to that because you haven't criticized their past behavior. And so focus on the future, focus on the one change that you'd like to see made in the future. And I say one change because a lot of times when we deliver feedback, we assume that we need to be comprehensive. And what happens when you give people lots of feedback is they shut down. They don't hear it anymore. So focus on one thing, make it about the future. And if you can, make it a conversation. Say, hey, what do you think about that? Because now they no longer feel like you are telling them what to do. You're talking about it, but you're collaborating together on finding the best possible solution. And that feels like teamwork to people.
Okay. There's a few ingredients I'm picking up there. It sounded quite specific. It wasn't generic or vague. It was one thing and it was future focused. That's really quite interesting. And the defensiveness, I can tell you 100% that's true. As soon as someone gets into a defensive, notice that I'm going to say, I've got this saying that the blood rushes from their ears. They're not hearing a single word anymore. They're just in fight, flight, or freeze. And they've got their boxing gloves up against their face. They just think that you're a boxer coming at them from the other side of the ring, and they're not hearing a single word that you're saying at that point. As soon as they get into a defensive frame.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, here's something else that you should never do. Never say, "Can I give you some feedback?" Don't do that, because the moment you do that, what do people do? They know you're about to get ripped to shreds, and that makes them defensive. So, starting with, "Hey, can I rip into you?" Not helpful. Just say, "Hey, what do you think about doing this the next time?" Done.
That's interesting.
I think this is part of the reason why people don't like to give negative feedback is because they feel like, oh, I'm going to hurt this person's feelings. You're not hurting anybody's feelings if you deliver a future focus and you focus on one thing and you make it a conversation. Just two teammates talking.
You've given us something interesting to think about here. It goes against some of the science that people get taught, right? So they get taught about models like SBI, specific behavior. No, it's situation, behavior, impact. When I do that, I add the word action and I talk about future focus. What are you going to do differently in the future? But you're saying just go to the future. Just go, hey, what about next time we do it this way?
I just think we overcomplicate this and we make it harder for people to feel closer to each other at the end of the conversation. Because often what happens when you're delivering feedback to someone is you're implicitly saying, you messed up and I know better and I'm going to fix you. And none of those are conducive to having a stronger relationship at the end of it.
I feel like we need to have you back on the show and just have an hour talking about feedback. All right. Look, Ron, this has been absolutely amazing. We are drawing to a close now. So I want to summarize a couple of points and then take us to our rapid round. So Dr. Ron Friedman telling us about super teams and all of the research that he finds about what are the ingredients of these teams and what are some of the misunderstandings that we have about team performance. So you've given us a lot to think about. The first ingredients. How are our teams rewarded? Do they have a shared goal? And are they rewarded around that shared goal, not just around individual performance? Do they have role clarity? Do they have interdependence where they understand how they rely on each other and how they can co-create something greater than any of the individuals can? That these super teams, they're able to manage their time, their energy, and their attention in a much clearer way, that they make each other better through accountability and striving for each other and with each other, and that they've got a mindset that they're never satisfied. They're always looking for, what can we do better? Always with this continuous improvement mindset. And that includes some of these great feedbacks that Ron is talking about in relation to feedback and future focused feedback. So if you're a leader listening to the show, maybe play that back again and think about things that you can do to put these things in place, the shared goals, the role clarity, the interdependence, having these rituals where individual productivity and team productivity come together instead of being in conflict with each other, having conversations about managing your time, energy, and attention, about having rituals to make each other better and to have this continuous improvement focus. Thank you so much, Ron. I've really loved this conversation. Going to take us now to our rapid round. These are the same 4 questions we ask all of our guests. So what's the one thing that you know now, Dr. Ron Friedman, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I started to know it when I was about 18, but it's been confirmed every time, which is your success rate is directly tied to your willingness to fail. And so the more things you strive for and don't get right, chances are you're also going to increase your success rate. And there's research showing on creative geniuses, this is that is kind of the secret of their success, is Mozart, for example, had way more songs written than his contemporaries. Today, of course, we only know him for a fraction of his successful songs, but he continued to deliver over and over again. And so in The Best Place to Work, I talk about this story. I forget the name of the woman. You might know this, Mick. The woman who started, it's like pantyhose for shapewear.
Yeah, okay.
But do you remember her name?
I don't know her name, but I'm familiar with the story.
Okay, the story is her basically like this woman used to sell fax machines door to door. And one day she came up with this idea for shapewear, which is basically like pantyhose, but for the body. And so she started wearing these. She started making them herself by cutting off the feet and then decided she's going to make this into a company. And now it's $1 billion brand. It's called Spanx. I'm going to get pieces of the story that's going to be revealed to me as it's revealed to you, Spanx. And so one of the secrets to her success is that she talks about how at dinner with her dad will always ask, what did you fail at today? And that taught her and her family that not just success is what matters, but if you're not failing, you're not learning. And I really like that. And I think it's true. And I will often think about, what did I fail at this week? And if there's nothing there, it means it doesn't mean it was a perfect week. It means I haven't tried taking enough big swings.
Yeah, good. I wish I had learned that one earlier as well, I got to say. Okay, what's your favorite book?
That's a tough question, Mick. And I'll tell you why, because I feel like for a book to really resonate, it's not just about the book. It's also about the time in your life in which you read that book. And so it's kind of like there's two things happening here, just like who you are at the moment and what the book actually is. and you got to meet at the perfect time. It's kind of like meeting your perfect spouse. So generally I read way more fiction than I do nonfiction. I feel like it's just relaxing and centering and is a great way of like taking a bath for the brain at the end of the day. And so a book I recently read that I loved, and I can look up the name of the author just so I can provide it for I think his name is Matthew Pearl. The name of the book is The Award, and it's about an author Matthew Pearl, The Award. And it's about an author who moves in, he's a struggling author, and he moves into a building with a very successful author. And he thinks it's going to completely transform his life. And he does, but just not in the way that he thinks. And it's just very, very fascinating to read.
That sounds interesting. Okay. What's your favorite quote?
So in the book, in Super Teams, I talk about this guy named Sam Presti. Sam Presti is a general manager of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And when you walk into his office, what you'll see is his office is filled with quotes everywhere. And it's because this is what he does. He reads books and he pulls out quotes that he loves and he just puts them on the wall. So he's reminded of these great ideas as he goes along throughout his day. And I've kind of taken that same practice myself and I've stolen it from him. So I've got quotes all around the office. So progress and relief are usually found on the opposite side of a shitty first draft. So in other words, just write the first draft. You're going to feel so much better. It doesn't need to be perfect. And if you just lower your standards temporarily to get the first draft out, you're going to feel a lot better.
Yeah, really good. Okay, very good. Okay, and finally, Ron, there's going to be people listening to this and they're probably self-diagnosing and going, yeah, I don't think I'm at the other end of the scale of what Ron's talking about and these approaches to creating a super team. How do people find you if they want to know more?
I'm available online at ronfriedmanphd.com. The name of my company is Super Teams Inc., and we deliver keynotes and workshops to leaders and their teams on how to improve. But where I'd urge you to go, if you're interested in applying some of these insights, is a website that we've created that takes the best insights in the book and teaches them to you in under 20 minutes. It's available at superteamsmasterclass.com. It's a course we've created completely free if you buy the book. And in addition to the free course, you'll also get a discussion guide that you can use to share some of these insights with the people on your team. So superteamsmasterclass.com.
Yeah, wonderful, Ron. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a great honor and pleasure. I can tell you that you've challenged my thinking on some of these things. And I think about this all day, every day. And you've challenged some of my thinking, but you've also given me some practical things that I can go and try and do things a little differently. And I know the audience is going to be the same. So thank you so much for the gift of your wisdom, your experience, and your practical insights on what we can do to create our own super teams. Thank you.
It's really my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mick. And thank you all for listening.
What a rich and practical conversation with Dr. Ron Friedman. The idea that really stayed with me is that team performance is often misunderstood. We can have talented people, we can have good intentions, we can have hardworking individuals, but that does not automatically create a high-performing team. Ron reminded us that great teams are built deliberately. They have shared goals, they have role clarity, they understand how their work fits together. And perhaps most importantly, they feel a genuine sense of interdependence, that we need each other in order to succeed. That is such an important distinction, because without shared goals, people can pull in different directions. Without role clarity, we either drop the ball or get into turf wars. And without interdependence, we may simply become a group of individuals working beside each other rather than a true team. I also appreciated Ron's challenge around productivity. Many of us have learned individual productivity habits. Turn off notifications, batch your email, protect your deep work time. And those things can be very useful. But Ron gave us the warning. One person's deep work can become another person's bottleneck. That does not mean we abandon focus. It means we manage time, we manage energy, and we manage attention at a team level. Instead of everyone creating their own private system, super teams have collective agreements. They create focus blocks together. They reduce unnecessary meetings. They respect each other's attention. And they make it easier for people to do their best work without accidentally making someone else's work harder. The second major lesson was that super teams make each other better. Ron shared that on the best teams, accountability does not only flow from the boss, it flows between teammates. People care about letting each other down. They lift the standard for one another. They share credit, they seek feedback, and they help each other to improve. That is powerful because it reminds us that leadership is not only top-down. On average teams, the manager leads. On elite teams, the players lead. That means everyone has a role in creating the culture. And the third lesson was continuous improvement. Super teams are not satisfied with good enough. They keep learning, they keep experimenting, they keep asking, how can we do this better next time? I found Ron's advice on feedback especially useful. Feedback should not be a dramatic event that puts people on the defensive. It should be timely, specific, and future-focused. Instead of saying, can I give you some feedback, and triggering the boxing gloves, we can simply ask, what do you think about trying this next time? That small shift changes the energy of the conversation. So here is my invitation to you. Look at your own team and ask 3 questions. Do we have a genuinely shared goal? Are our roles and responsibilities clear? And are our habits helping the team succeed or just helping individuals cope? Then choose one small team agreement to improve the way you manage time, energy, attention, feedback, or accountability. And do it together. Because high-performing teams do not happen by accident. They are built through shared habits, shared standards, and shared ownership. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Leadership Project. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who is trying to build a stronger, more intentional team. And join us next week when I speak with Franz Kampfer. We move from the systems and rituals of high-performing teams to the inner work of leadership identity. What happens when leaders remove the masks, reconnect with their values, and learn to lead with authenticity, courage, and integrity? You've been listening to The Leadership Project. If today sparked an insight, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with one other person who would benefit from listening to the show. A huge thank you to Gerald Calabo for his tireless work editing every episode, and to my amazing wife, Say, who does all the heavy lifting in the background to make this show possible. None of this happens without them. Around here, we believe leadership is a practice, not a position, that people should feel seen, heard, valued, and that they matter, and that the best leaders trade ego for empathy, certainty for curiosity, and control for trust. If that resonates with you, please subscribe on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. And if you want more, follow me on LinkedIn and explore our archives for conversations that move you from knowing to doing. Until next time, lead with curiosity, courage, and care.